Okay, so this is a kidney model, the urinary system model. There's another model that's the whole urinary system with the ureters and all of that, but we can get most of it out of this. So this, if it's showing the artery on top, this means that that is usually the anterior structure, and so it's posterior right now, and therefore what we're looking at is the back of the right kidney, because this would be the vein, and the vein is always on top. So this is the back of the right kidney. This is the adrenal gland. The outer portion of it is the cortex. This releases over 24 steroid hormones. This is the adrenal medulla. It releases catecholamines, which are epinephrine and norepinephrine, to instigate the fight or flight response and to prolong that 10 times longer. This is the cortex. This outer portion right here is the cortex of the kidney, and the inner portion where each of these pyramids are located, that's the medulla, or the medullary region. Notice that in the medullary region we have only tubules. This is where exchange is occurring, countercurrent exchange of sodium chloride and water in the loop of Henle. And the longer the loop of Henle, the more water you can take from the food you eat. This is the collecting duct that would be targeted by ADH from the endocrine system to stop the loss of water. And this entire structure right here, one of them, this loop, the proximal tubule and the distal tubule that is going to come right back by the afferent arteriole that we'll get to in a minute, is going to be all known as a nephron. There are 1 million nephrons per kidney at birth. Okay, so this, if we go back out here and just build up to the larger size, you can see those tubules here. Notice that the cortex is where all of the all of the renal corpuscles are found if you come over here. This is Bowman's capsule surrounded by simple squamous epithelia, and the capillary bed with podocytes and the filtration slits that allow for filtrate to go through them under pressure from this afferent arteriole is going to be the known together glomerulus and capsule as the renal corpuscle. The rest of the nephron is all tubules. So the corpuscles, there are 1 million of those corpuscles in the cortical region. Here you can see those little small dots. If we enlarge one medullary pyramid here into this middle one, then we're going to see two different types of nephrons. The one that's further out is called a cortical nephron. That cortical nephron is probably 85%, it's 850,000 of the total million of these nephrons. Notice its loop of Henle is shorter, and it doesn't extend down into the medullary region as deep, and that's because this does most of the work for filtration. Once it's filtered most of the way on its last couple of times through, or last 10 times, who knows how many times through, but when it's almost concentrated enough, then you use this type of nephron, which is called a juxtamedullary nephron. A juxtamedullary nephron and this other cortical nephron are fed by certain blood vessels. The blood vessels come off of the renal artery. They're off of the abdominal aorta first, then the renal artery takes them and it goes into these segmental arteries, which then go to lobar, goes in between these structures, these medullary pyramids, becomes interlobar, then becomes the arcuate artery that you see here. All right, the arcuate artery is going to give rise to an artery that has two names, either the cortical radiate artery that feeds into the glomerulus, or it's also called the interlobular artery. So that artery is what supplies each of these nephrons along the afferent arteriole. That's this larger blood vessel right here. So this blood vessel that feeds the glomerulus, the afferent arteriole, again, is either the cortical radiate or the interlobular artery. And it's a branch off of the arcuate. On the other side of this would be, and all of these blood vessels here are called peritubular capillaries if they're out here in the cortex. If they're down here surrounding the loops of Henle and the tubules, then it's called the vasa recta. The vasa recta and the peritubular capillaries can receive anything that's being sent from the tubules out, or it can secrete something and put it back into the tubules. This is called countercurrent multiplication, and it's what allows us to maintain blood pH and blood salinity. This entire structure right here, the collecting duct, is going to give rise to the pathway that leads out of the body. It's going to go through this renal papilla here, and then as that filtrate that's finally filtered, and we'll talk about filtration in just a minute, the filtrate that's going to be leaving goes through the papilla into this structure, which is the minor calyx, and then it moves into the major calyx, which is these large collecting areas. This is a fat body right here, but as filtrate enters this area, it collects in the renal pelvis, goes down through the ureter, which is lined by transitional epithelia, by the way, and then all the way to the urinary bladder where it can be micturated or sent out of the body. If we come back over here and go blood vessel, or go off of that blood vessel into this structure, now we're in the renal corpuscle into this glomerulus. This glomerulus is under hydrostatic pressure. This is the only area of the body where hydrostatic pressure overcomes osmotic resistance. And so filtrate, well, 98% of what you make in the filtrate is going to be stuff that you need back. So whatever goes into this cup, the cup has to be simple squamous so that you can filter and then diffuse that right back into the peritubular capillaries from the proximal convoluted tubule. You'll learn that in physiology. As it goes into the capsule or the cup, it moves into this area right here. This is the proximal convoluted tubule. That's this squiggly line right there. The proximal convoluted tubule will take the filtrate after reabsorbing, and by the way, going from a tubule into the blood is called reabsorption. Going from the bloodstream back into a tubule is called tubular secretion. So this is filtering, and the blood vessels around each of the tubules will either be reabsorbing or secreting. Those three things make up the entire ability of the kidney, and the kidney's major ability overall is excretion of waste, and it's to control systemic blood pressure and glomerular filtration, GFR, out of this PCT. So when we look at that sequence, like I said, it's going into the PCT, the proximal tubule. This has modifications or brush border, just like the intestines do. And that brush border allows for increased absorption and reabsorption back into the bloodstream and the peritubular capillaries. This descending portion right here is the descending limb of the loop of Henle. Comes back up the other side, the ascending limb. And then notice that this top portion, the distal convoluted tubule, always comes there next to that afferent arteriole, like you can see here. And those two things together, this distal convoluted tubule and this afferent arteriole, form what's called the JG apparatus and control systemic blood pressure and GFR, glomerular filtration rate. So there are many different areas on this model that are targeted by hormones. Aldosterone targets the DCT for movement of sodium and water to be sucked with it. ADH targets brings in aquaporins and targets this area of the collecting ducts and stops the loss of water if blood pressure goes down. That's probably the one that you need to know the most. And that's called the RAAS system, the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. That'll be huge in physiology. But overall, this whole structure is, again, regulating systemic blood pressure and controlling GFR, or the filtrate that's going through the system and being excreted out of the body. Study.